Dr. Kat Hicks is a senior research scientist at Khan Academy. I'm not really going to tell you anything about her path or background because she's going to get into all of that. But I am going to give my introduction by the way of how I got to, quote, know Dr. Hicks. And so it was on Twitter. And I just kind of found this data scientist / social scientist who tweeted about non-traditional paths to careers in tech and truly cared about the human side of data. Found that she was super passionate about helping individuals who didn't have family members or the know-how or mentors that helped guide them on the career path, and who really cares and thinks deeply about measurement. So I didn't at all, when I first started following her on Twitter, know about her San Diego ties, but I really enjoyed learning from her on Twitter. And so I'm so excited to have her here today so that you all can learn from her as well. And with that, I am going to turn over the reins and say thank you so much, Dr. Hicks, for coming today. And I can't wait to hear all you have to say.
Thank you. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. What a charming introduction. I really appreciate that. One good thing that came out of Twitter. So I'm going to be talking about being both a social scientist and a data scientist, which might sound a little confusing because you often hear about one or the other, but it is my contention that there is a growing need for people who kind of dance in the middle of these two worlds. And if you are someone who feels yourself pulled in these two directions, I'm here to say I've felt that for more than 10 years and no one has convinced me to pick a side yet. So I think it can work out. All right. I'm having a little, there we go. So as I was introduced, my name's Kat Hicks. You can find me on Twitter. There's my handle. And I like to give a couple keywords. I really like causal inference, which is kind of making decisions about why things happen and how we can cause them to happen in the future. I like to try to give a voice to things that I think have to do with the resilience of students. So that's pretty top of mind for everybody this year. It has actually always been pretty top of mind for me, but this is a year where we see this stuff really rising to the surface at a large scale. I am extremely interested in behavioral puzzles, data science puzzles, and the idea of measurement. So the whole idea of measurement, what makes good measurement, what's a bad use of measurement, those kinds of things. I wanted to start by asking a little bit more about you than talking about myself, because really you are the important people here to me. This is a little bit of a moment. I wanted to put this slide up and ask, just think for a second about what you can get from me. Because I know my own career path and I don't really particularly care about just pontificating about my work. So take a second to think, what are you interested in? What are you worried about? Yeah, I always find that very important and interesting conversation. Is there anything I can answer? I'm not at the end of my career. I'm just a little bit ahead. I've gone down a few paths in the woods, and so if I can help kind of put a little lamppost out there for one of these paths, let me know. And also, I want to acknowledge we're in the middle of a really weird time. I'm feeling it. You're feeling it. Probably people on this call are going through immense difficulties. I think that you're amazing for showing up and being in class during this time. I appreciate that. So we could talk about that too. I study achievement and I study people getting through really hard stuff in their lives and still caring about education. So honestly, if you want to have that kind of conversation, I'm open to it. It's part of my job too. So those are kind of my big prompts there. You can hold that. I'm going to give you a little bit of background and feel free to just start dropping questions as they occur to you. And I'll get to them when I can see the chat again. All right. So a quick overview about my route. I started as a baby with no knowledge of anything, but I like to say that I started kind of this career path around in grad school, but really I was a teenager reading tons of like popular science psychology books. I would go to Borders, if you remember Borders, or bookstores like Barnes and Nobles, and I would pull off like the weird pop psychology books that people published. So I was interested in questions of how humans behave really early. And I went into a PhD in psychology. I did it at UC San Diego. a place some of you might be familiar with. So in that program, it was a very traditional, quantitative, empirical psychology program. Perhaps a bunch of you have taken classes in that department, or maybe you're all in COGS Sci. I'm not sure. There was always a bit of a like, what's the difference between COGS Sci and Psych debate at UCSD when I was there. So I was on the psych side. But in psychology, I studied learning environments. I got a PhD. I got a good foundation in really rigorous social science. And then I kind of said, what is the point? You know, what can I do with this? I just really wanted to put that stuff into action into the world. I also had absolutely no idea how to do that. You know, it felt very removed from the real world. I felt like I'd never had a real job. You know, faculty in my grad department told me you can't do anything but be in academia. There is no way to apply this science to the real world. In my PhD, I was going to classrooms and talking to kids and asking them things about how they thought about mistakes. And it seemed to me that that was extremely relevant to a lot of decisions that human beings make. And perhaps a lot of industries would be interested in it. But it was very difficult to convince other folks of that. So I found my way into tech via an internship. So I cold applied to an internship. I got an email about this internship at Google. I thought no one's ever going to look at me, you know, but whatever, I'm going to apply for it. And I got it. And that was the beginning of my journey in tech. At this time, people did not call social science work data science. There was not nearly that kind of understanding. I think in the last 5 years, it's changed immensely, but I was doing a lot of statistics in this early tech work that people weren't yet calling data science. So it was a weird bridge moment of trying to convince people, you know, that what I did mattered and would actually matter to work in tech. Okay, I always do this where I get trapped in the early parts of this route, and I want to speed through to get to the parts that are probably more relevant to you guys. So I had a lot of churn and transition at this moment. You can probably see this. I did a postdoc, so I came back to kind of back to academia, but I actually did a postdoc in a very interdisciplinary world. So I was joint appointed in computer science and engineering, in cognitive science, and I was working in the design lab at UCSD. So I became the only psychologist on a team of computer scientists and design folks. There were people from the med school. It was just like a whole diverse range. And that was this moment when things just really clicked for me, like, hey, you know, I love being part of an interdisciplinary team. And I really love being the voice for social science and psychology in that team. And the math that I can do about human behavior, the statistics and stuff, which I had always kind of written off, like I'm not technical, I'm not like a math person, you know, all of these stereotypes that we bring to this work. I realized, oh, whoa, no, like this stuff is very, very valuable. So supercharged with that kind of self-awareness, I went back into tech. I got my first job as a researcher, which was as something that we called a learning evaluation analyst at Google. I worked on large-scale programs that Google had within their organization to teach and educate people who were already Google employees. And some of these were very important. So it was things like, if, you know, every year thousands of people are promoted to becoming managers for the first time in their career, and they have never managed anybody before, can we build training programs that will help them learn how to do this, particularly for very complex work, you know, like engineering work, where you need to be both technically proficient and deal with people management. So I helped to evaluate programs like that. And that was a moment for me of really finally proving that you can use social science to make people's lives better in the real world. So we did things like push for better policies for people who had a role transition within the company, evaluated whether or not we were spending enough and investing enough in manager training, those kinds of questions. I left Google to found a startup, which was super exciting as well. So if you have startup entrepreneur related questions, this was another radical identity shift moment for me. I had never expected that I would do this kind of thing, but I had a very close friend at Google, a wonderful self-taught engineer. He and I got together all the time and we're starting to talk about, it feels like engineers just don't have certain kinds of knowledge work tools that they need. I had a social science perspective on this because I had studied how people learned. And it was an exciting thing to do. I was in San Francisco. I was like, let's go, let's do it, let's pitch, VCs. Which I had never done before. No one in my family has been remotely related to entrepreneurship or anything like that. So the whole thing was like a very big challenge, but one that taught me a huge amount. So I was the co-founder of this startup and the chief research officer. And we did things like we got into the Y Combinator interview process. We had an alpha product. As I said, I pitched to VCs. I think this is the kind of thing that a lot of people don't get exposed to if they don't grow up in certain worlds. So I'm happy to answer questions about that too. It was a lovely time of life. As all startups, all good startups do, ours faded gently into the sunset of us not quite finding the right market fit, us like deciding kind of for some personal reasons we weren't willing to pour in, the kind of dedication that you want to do. And I like to be really open and honest about that because I think it's a perfectly acceptable decision to make sometimes in your life about where you want to go. And I don't consider it a failure at all. The vast majority of businesses are closed pretty quickly. We actually lived longer than a year, which is more than the vast majority of startups. So that's just good stuff to keep in mind. I founded a consultancy after that because, why not? I didn't quite know what else to do. I was really interested in where the tech industry was going with research and, in my opinion, kind of baby steps learning how to do research, honestly. And I was pretty excited about getting a little bit away from Silicon Valley and working more with smaller groups of people. So I worked with, for instance, a very small organization that was trying to change the care services that they provided to older people who were aging in place, which is a huge population in the US. So I helped them design research to understand how can we build out a service platform that will be accessible to older people, who have complex needs, that will understand their family situations, which can be very complex, that will not make them feel patronized, but will make them feel cared for. Like some very difficult and interesting psychological questions involved in that research. And I found that work incredibly rewarding. I consulted with some education orgs. I consulted with like big names down to like, nonprofit, like 10 social workers in a room, places that you'll never have heard of. And I found those things quite rewarding, actually. So I really still have that kind of side hustle and really love that. And then I came to Khan Academy. So last year, school started closing. Everything that you all experienced started happening. Khan Academy was hiring and building out their research team really for the first time. And it was kind of just a perfect fit for me. I'd always cared tremendously about learning. I was feeling a lot of emotion about what was happening in the world and wanted to, in some capacity, try to make students' lives better. Khan Academy's user base shot up by millions in the spring. So we were dealing with this kind of huge platform change. Khan Academy works with school districts fairly recently. It's kind of new for the organization and is one of the only free products for a lot of these grade schools in certain areas. So it just became like this moment for, Khan Academy usage to increase. And they have a deep need to understand that usage and understand, if our products are working with these populations of students. All right, let's see. Am I keeping track of my time here? I think so. So I want to dive even a little bit deeper below the surface layer of saying, here's a route, here's my resume, everything sounds really great, and I just want to say, leave a little bit of room for this too. There have been a lot of times in my career when I felt like things were not going to work, when I faced a lot of obstacles, when I felt maybe like I had failed deeply. And I just like to be explicit and honest about this because I think 90% of the stuff that people put out there about their careers is very performative. And I understand why, because I study performance. But, you know, it's really hard to be open and vulnerable about this kind of thing. So I like to try to. I didn't go to school until college, which might not be a thing that Shannon actually knows about me. I don't know this. But I was raised in a very conservative unschooling environment, and so had to kind of climb my way into school. That was really challenging. I went to an undergrad school that didn't even teach computer science classes, so I didn't even know what computer science was, which really seems insane in 2021, I know. So I taught myself to code. I taught myself statistics pretty much. And I do, if I do say so myself, quite rigorous statistics almost every day. And yet spent these years thinking, wow, I don't have the education for this. I have not taken these classes. I'm not a statistician. But this year, I have put out reports that have gone to statisticians, and I've argued with them, and I've won those arguments, right? So sometimes you don't know what path will take you into interesting work. As I already kind of mentioned this, when I started working in tech, it really felt like data science was still just a branch of computer science. I do kind of think, and apologies to the computer science majors who are probably in the room, I think computer science tries to own everything. And I refuse to let them. So I continue to call myself a social scientist and not just, a data scientist who happens to have a whole PhD in psychology. So both sides have been very, very useful. But there have been a lot of moments when people did not have that perception, when they thought, oh, statistics is not something that social scientists do. I think there's increasing awareness of this stuff, particularly as we talk about epidemiology this year or economics, and like lots of people the world over kind of understand, oh, if you do predictive modeling, you actually might come from one of these fields. But you'll still face this a lot in tech, this kind of perception that, some of these fields don't do the work that they actually invented sometimes. And, when I founded a startup, we were a Black majority and female founded startup. So that was a very, very interesting thing to be. And a very important thing for me was, that we were part of those communities. If you don't know this, we get, groups like this, teams like this get less than 1% of VC funding. It's really quite extraordinary. How many opportunities are denied to you. So working with my co-founder and our engineers and understanding like those realities and intersections was an incredible thing, a thing that I wouldn't trade for the world, but also like very difficult thing. So if you have questions around how do I navigate some of these worlds with identities, that feel like they face certain barriers, I can deeply empathize. And if nothing else, I can at least say we are all out there. Your people are out here, and I hope that you can find them. All right. So the point of all of this is just to say, I hope that you feel like you can persist. I hope that you feel like even if you face challenges and failures on these career routes, people that you might look at and say, hey, I want that kind of career, they have probably faced them too. And you can get through all of this, I guess, is the point. So keep going. All right. So as I said, now I'm a research scientist at Khan Academy. We're a team that we call Data Insights. And our main goal is to measure the impact of using Khan Academy on learning. So to give you a little bit more flavor around the work that I do, this comes with some important components. We need to measure learning over time. So learning is a very complex, multi-causal thing that happens. You're all engaged in it, so congratulations. But, just so that people who study it find it very hard to measure. So there's lots of statistical complexity with trying to measure things over time. You probably have encountered a little bit of this. And they're in complex school systems. So it's not only complicated because it's happening over time, but it's complicated because it's like you're looking at students, and students are in classrooms, and classrooms are in schools, and schools are in school districts. And also there are teachers rotating through all of these things. And then those school districts are in states, and those states are impacted by school policy. Oh, like that sounds like way too many levels of data, but I actually love that stuff. So it's what I would call highly nested data structures, also just highly nested social structures. So when you want to make an argument about why something happens and what will increase learning, you kind of need to have this galaxy brain level like ability to go, to all of these levels. And that's something that I actually focus quite a bit of my time on, is environmental understanding and like this kind of multi-layered stuff. So that's part of my focus at Khan Academy. All right, so let's dive for a second into like the practical, because I was told that it would be really useful for you all to hear a bit about what my days actually look like. So this all was like big, high concept, big problem stuff. But I looked at my calendar and I wrote down everything that I did last week. So here's what it was. On Monday, I started with some team meetings. We're a small team. There's me and two other researchers and our manager, who's basically our VP of data. And so we have a meeting where it's quite practical. We talk about our projects and what's going on. Then I have a one-on-one with another researcher, so kind of my closest peer colleague. We're sometimes working on stuff together. Lately, we're all working very separately, so we're kind of just like either catching up, giving each other emotional validation, sometimes solving actual problems. Then I spent a few hours trying to fix a query to get into our databases for some part of the database that had been messed up in some like long ago forgotten history. So I worked on that. And then I took a break because that was frustrating me. And I read an education paper. So I try to keep up with current research. A lot of folks in academia don't think that anyone reads their research, but I do. So I read papers every week and then I try to summarize them to my team. That's kind of part of my job, has evolved from being just a researcher. Now I'm far enough along in my career that I am trying to translate knowledge often to other people. And that's become kind of a much bigger part of my job, which is really rewarding. Honestly, it's really pretty great. So Tuesday, had a project meeting. I remembered something that I knew about motivation research. There's a team working on that at Khan Academy. And I thought, oh, there's a nuance that they probably don't know about. So I wrote a little lit review thing for them. I like to write, so I do that a lot. And then I sat around and thought about doing time series analysis, which had this like kind of complex problem to it that I hadn't figured out. And then I spent the whole afternoon basically mentoring junior colleagues. So again, this is becoming more and more part of my job. I spend time saying, hey, how's your project going? What's getting in the way? Can I be a source of feedback for a weird conversation you had with a stakeholder, where you didn't quite understand like how to get across what you were doing? Can we workshop this? We do a lot of like collaborative relationship building, things like that in order to function as an organization. Okay, so I don't want to spend all my time on this, but I'll breeze through the rest of it. On Wednesday, I might have another project meeting. I might have to catch up on my email backlog. I probably go back to stats for a couple of hours. We do a code review. Wednesday is a day that we're not allowed to have any meetings, except for this project meeting, which I had for some reason, because people break that rule. So it's usually a day where I do things like a code review. And we do code reviews in very opinionated ways because we're all a bunch of social scientists and we have strong opinions about this being a time not just to like fix typos or talk about efficiencies in the code, but actually a time, where we really need to argue about how we're representing data, how we're solving a problem, what might make it easier in the future, trade-offs like I could get this done in 2 hours, or I could spend 5 hours, but then it would be more scalable later. And like, is that a thing that's worth doing? I mean, just a huge amount of our work is really practical stuff like that. All right. So I usually try to make Thursdays and Fridays a little more fun. Fun for me is like more statistics. Sometimes it's sitting in on things that other teams are doing. I really love qualitative research work, and that's happening in our organization. I try to stay connected to it. So I try to sit in on that kind of research sometimes to remind myself of what's really happening out there below the surface of the data, or maybe lateral to the data, I'm not sure. But that's a big part of our work too, is staying connected to the kind of realities of our product going out there into the world. I think if you don't do this as a data person, you're at a huge disadvantage and you often screw things up. So we try to do that. And then Fridays are very social for us. Usually we kind of hang out for a while. I usually wrap things up, write documentation, and then take off. So I often end Fridays actually at like 1 or 2 or something like that. I'm a pretty efficient worker. So yeah, that's my schedule. All right. What do you think about the time, Shannon? And what do you think about going through a case study versus just having time to chat more?
I'd say let's do the case study so they get a
Okay.
sense of what it is. And I have recorded all of the chat questions. So if we don't get through all of them, Kat has offered that I could send some after. So and then I'll share with the answers to that with everybody publicly. So I'd say maybe 5-10 minutes for the case study, and then we can do questions. Okay.
Sounds great to me. All right. Yes. Okay. So in this time of that I alluded to of maybe doing stats, what am I doing stats on? It's typically one of our products and how our products are functioning in the real world. So this is an example of a Khan Academy product. It's called Map Accelerator, and it is out there in the world. You could go look it up, but it's a product that goes mostly to school districts. So in the world of education, there are these big tests. They're not the same as like the SAT and those kinds of standardized tests. They're actually more like accountability testing and growth measurement. There are these big tests called the MAP growth tests, and you take them in grade school, and they help schools. You take them like, I think it's 3 times a year. I think it's fall, winter, and spring. And throughout this, you kind of see students growing in math. So there are these very interesting tests that a lot of school districts in the Southwest use. I'm not sure their full extent. And actually, NWEA, which runs these tests, is currently involved in being one of the main players trying to measure learning loss during school closures. So this is kind of like, just to give you flavor, like this is like a big educational organization and sort of a standard thing that happens in K through 12 education. So Khan Academy partnered with this organization to create a product called Map Accelerator, and it is specifically to help students practice and grow and learn and study between these tests. So it's not exactly test preparation as much as it's kind of like the test is the measure that we give occasionally, and students like general math learning is the thing that measure is trying to sample. But have the unique kind of partnership there where we can pull in the data from this testing organization. It's a very complex adaptive test, has a lot of data about students, and then we can use that to suggest appropriate learning materials for them. Okay, so none of that is the stuff that I have done. I didn't build the product, right? But I am interested in evaluating it. So my team, which is the efficacy and research team, we have to ask the question of, does this product work? If it does work, who does it work for? Does it work for everybody? Because that's a very important question. And under what conditions does it work? Which is not an easy question to answer in education, because when you have a nice idea about what will happen, in a school district, the one thing that you can count on is that will not be what you receive in your data set at the end. A reality of working with ed tech is that most people do not implement it. Most people use it for a little bit and then stop using it. You have lots and lots of implementation questions. And in fact, implementation science is a whole area. So we are kind of halfway in between implementation science and efficacy science. Efficacy science is like, did it work, when you did it perfectly? And implementation science is, how can we get it to that point, right? So we're in the not enviable position of needing to do both all the time, but also that's the place where you have an enormous amount of impact on real people's lives. So I might ask questions like, on this is, and I should have told you, this is what students will see, this screenshot. So they might log into their account. I think that this is the third grade account, because I didn't want to do any difficult math. So I set myself up with a third grader testing account that you can use in this product. So you can practice, you can watch videos and review, you can take quizzes, which then level you up in our progress system. And then all of that data floods into the back end at Khan Academy, and my team has to make sense of it. And so we ask research questions like, can we see different patterns in how students practice? And are there patterns that seem better than other patterns? Do those work for different grades differently? How about different kinds of schools? We see a reluctance for students to test themselves. Testing is hard. No surprise. No one likes it. It's a little stressful, but it is really effective at helping them learn and remember things. So how do we make tests something that people do? We see some things like, perhaps reluctance for students who feel like they're bad at math. They don't want to take math tests because they don't want to go through that emotional experience of feeling bad at it again. So, part of the questions that I ask are like, how can we scaffold those learners? You can see the psychology coming back and the importance of that in these research questions. But there's also a tremendous amount of statistics and just dealing with the data here. Okay, so that's kind of my example of a real world. I'm working on that. I'm going to work on that today after this talk. And these are two of my actual questions that I'm asking of this data. All right. Do we want to break here for questions? I have lots of other topics, but...
Yeah, let's pause here for questions. Yeah. Do you want to take a look at the chat, or do you want me to curate from it? Because there's been like 8-ish questions.
I can... Yeah, sorry, I don't know how to pull up the chat in.
Oh, it should be in the more dot again.
Got it. Okay.
Kat's team does not use Zoom, so I've
yeah, I'm so sorry. We're Google people. Okay. Did you want to is there anything that jumped out at you as like central to this course, or a thing you've seen come up? Otherwise, I can read through.
Yeah, so there I'll pull out one. It's kind of a theme across a few of these. So I'll break it down here into 2 points. The one is coming from, say, a COGS sci or a non-CS or data science background. Like,
yeah,
do you have tips or advice for those people? And similarly to that, I think it's a related question, worried about not having the skills or how to get into a completely new field that's not exactly your own. So I think those two are related.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. So let's talk about worry. So everyone, nobody has all the skills. Nobody ever has all the skills. So you have to think about getting in, like getting through one door. Just get your foot through one door. That's how I thought about it. It is so easy to be overwhelmed and to think, especially as these fields honestly keep growing and they keep pretending that people have more skills than they do. I can tell you, it did not take me nearly as long to break in and change fields as I thought it would. I do think that you want to think about what you're going to go for, right? So it's kind of, a lot of people seem to get stuck at this, like, I want a job, but the job is super vague. The job is like, I want to be this whole field or something. And you cannot be a whole field, right? You have to think, what's an actual job that I could do right now? And what could be my next step? And then after that, there's a next step. And in that job, maybe I add another skill, and then there's a next step. So that's how I thought about it. Some ways that I approached it was I looked at job descriptions of things, that felt interesting. If I missed something on it, if I was like 70% on the skills or something, I tried to get one more, but I think that there's a lot packed into these questions. And I just want to address the emotional part, about like not having the skills to be hired. I think that depending on where you are in your career, your job to get hired is just to be a little bit better than somebody else and to be like the person who's there willing to do the work. That is often how I feel in my job, that I'm not the world's expert in causal inference. I'm not the world's expert in time series, whatever, but I'm the person in the room right now who's willing to do it. And that has helped me a lot. Um, yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like I missed the first one. Like there was a little bit more practical about.
I guess tips or advice for somebody who doesn't have the perfect background. I think you gave some of them in there,
Mhm.
which is bulk up on the things that you want to get to, but know that you also have like the skills in certain areas. But if you have other tips or advice.
Yeah. So I have mentored a lot of students in career stuff. I try to do that on the side. And I find that, you spend a lot of time thinking about what you don't have. And I don't think people spend enough time thinking about what they do have. I know that that maybe seems ridiculous when you're like, I'm a student, like, good, I have very little experience because I was, just in school. So what, people sometimes do ask you unfair things, right? Especially in this world where they're like, please have 6 years of experience for this entry level job. So you kind of have to set all of that aside, and that is unfair. So I am an environmental researcher, so I like to point out we are dealing with environments that are sometimes ludicrous. You are dealing with hiring processes that are sometimes bad. In fact, I would say 90% of the time they're bad. But I also think you are dealing with a world that has not always given you the tools to really celebrate what you do know and what you can achieve and like what you actually are already 90% of the way towards. So for instance, when I was going from psychology into, data science stuff, I carried a lot of fear and baggage and things that people had directly said to me about not being able to do math, about what it means to code, about, all of these things I didn't know. And it turned out that most of those things were really wrong, and that there were a lot of skills that I had that I just hadn't labeled and I hadn't put words to. So it was both, yes, growing new skills, but you can't ask yourself to give yourself like a second education, in your spare time, like in the hustle, like in the evening. I think that there's a lot of chatter about that in tech that is incredibly unproductive, very bad for people, and not what people are doing. So, don't believe people. I'm sorry if I'm coming off kind of aggressive or like on a soapbox, but don't believe the kind of Twitter hustle like stuff where people act like everyone is working, 1,000 hours a week to teach themselves 20,000 things. That's just not happening. So this was a bit rambly, but like I learned how to tell a story about what I could contribute, and I realized that I already had a huge amount of skills, and you probably do too. So, depending on where you are in your career, what you want to talk about, I would really encourage thinking about where have I shown leadership potential. There's a lot that goes into solving technical problems that is not like excuse me, that is not like I took this one class sometimes. It's like I know how to dialogue with stakeholders. I know how to coordinate. I know how to project manage. There are lots and lots of things that fit underneath these buckets, even things like technical stuff, even coding. So when I, realized, oh, I actually know a lot about the way that we measure people and the way that variation works in data and like these kinds of things that I always considered kind of soft skills almost, or like research design, and didn't fit in data science, those have become the most valuable things about me to organizations. So that was long. That was a way too long of an answer, but
No, I love it. And
yeah.
I love the soapbox you jumped on because I think that's so important to realize that, this hustle all the time mentality is just not reality for the vast majority of people. Okay, the next question is a little
Mm.
more specific and it might
Mhm.
be hard to answer, but we'll see. So, when you start working on a new project with new data and a new goal, what do you dread going wrong? Like, what are you anticipating or worried about when you start something new?
Mm. I dread not having the time to get a shared understanding with people with really different backgrounds. Um, it's it's really nice when you work in with people who like totally understand why you work the way you do, like what concerns you have and how you think about stuff. And that just like it never happens, particularly if you are interested in working with data. And there are a lot of moments where people think that they understand things that they don't. There are a lot of moments of tension because people have a lot of agendas about what kind of story we might tell with data. So I worry about, am I going to get the space to defend, the decision? Are we going to get the space to talk about the, you know, the ways this could go wrong? I work in education stuff, right? So I feel that a huge part of my job is to be ethical and responsible with student data, to be extremely humble in knowing that I can't answer everything. And I think there's pressure, especially for researchers, because I am in a research role. There's this pressure that everything that you do is an answer. Like, like we're the name of our team is insights, and the name of your everything is like, we have the answer. And it's actually so much more questions than it is answers. Let me see. Was that
Yeah,
probably
that's
enough
perfect.
stuff? Yeah.
There's actually a follow-up similar to that now that we're talking about research. And since you have experience in both worlds, there was a question: how does research in corporations differ from research in academia?
Yeah. So I always have this little chip on my shoulder when people say industry versus academia, because there are a lot of industries in the world. And so I think some organizations function more similarly to academic research, and some that's just not quite the category division that I would always make. But let me talk about some differences. I think that some organizations and academia are very interested in rigor. They're very interested in going the full length of the last mile, and my team actually is like that. So we're in an extremely rigorous team, and we even go through some peer review processes. So a lot of people don't think that exists in industry research, but it can. um, I think that if you're working in a role that's much more focused on product development, you will experience an extremely different calendar cycle. You might have rapid turnaround. You might have a development process that is working with engineers. I have worked in that kind of environment and I have enjoyed it. It changes the kinds of questions that you can ask. So sometimes certain things about the world are more defined, like, we have this feature, we need to evaluate it. Like, the research question is not going to be, how do people learn? It's going to be, did this feature work in this way in this classroom, or something like that. And that's a perfectly valid, and some people love to live at that level. I kind of float between some of those levels. There's certainly, financial differences. um, there's differences in, I think that in going into industry, there's a lot of different kinds of impact you can think about trying to have, and that has been a very interesting thing. As a consultant, I felt like I had a huge amount of impact on employees' lives. So I would come into an organization and say, you need to build out this research understanding and treat your team right. So something that is like a completely different kind of work product than just delivering a journal article or something like that. But is one that matters a lot to me. I'll stop there. Yeah.
Perfect. We have a few more minutes. So I want to say, were there anything else that you wanted to touch on, or should I do another question?
Um, I see a couple questions like, how do you actually learn stats? Things like that. Um, uh, uh, my mom says this thing that's like one pant leg at a time. So that's that's, you teach yourself things, I think, by finding examples of things to work on. There's a huge amount of material out there online, and I just want to address that really, because I saw a couple of questions around, like, look, if you're not someone who was in the classroom with this stuff, how do you even know what to work on? I think it's really, you connect to people, hopefully, like someone like me is a useful example of this. You see what kinds of problems you might want to work on in the future, and you try to build backwards from that, to look at the skill sets involved. And yeah, so I did it, honestly, not like in some kind of inspirational, like Rocky movie montage, much more like haphazard, I need to analyze this one survey. I want to get a little better. I'm going to learn how to automate this one part of it. Like just very chaotic, mix of Stack Overflow and textbooks and YouTube videos, and a bit of Khan Academy. I think that really figuring out the problems that you actually want to solve in the world and not getting distracted by the fact that you could go forever, in a rabbit hole about a domain is a good part of that. So, there's a lot of like theoretical statistic stuff that just is not relevant to me, very practical stuff, and having a little bit of knowledge across a lot of topics has been useful for me.
Perfect. I think that's also similarly answers the like, it's been difficult to find motivation for education during these times, which you addressed towards the beginning. Like, yes, that's true. And somebody asked, how might you encourage others to continue on that path and continue to pursue your goals? And I think part of it was what you just said, right? Like find something you're interested in and go down that path, because we're certainly more likely to do that than just to learn something we're not interested in. But if you have any other advice or motivation or tips that we could leave off on, I'd love to hear them now. Totally putting you on the spot here.
Yeah. Okay. So, I, I don't know if you're going to like this, as a professor, but sometimes I think that it makes sense that you're not motivated. Motivation is like a reaction to what's around you. Motivation is not a thing. I don't think that students are responsible for being a perpetual motion, forever generating like their own. You're in a tough situation. And that is so hard. And I think that we are all responding to that. So I have gone through a lot of cycles of not being motivated or struggling. And I have had to shift the goalposts and shift the like definition of success. A lot of the stuff that I've worked on when I've been an advocate for students who come from different backgrounds is trying to get people to see, that if someone has persisted a little bit and gotten like, C's or something, and then gone or much, lower grades than that, and then gone home and worked a second job and taken care of, their siblings and all of these things, that success, the fact that they showed up to a classroom is an enormous achievement. So I think for me, changing the definition of what success is really important. I think understanding that motivation is a cycle and that taking care of yourself and putting yourself in a situation where you feel motivated, like it's not just on you to feel motivated in every possible world. Like motivation to me is a response, like happiness. But I will end on this. Like I think that education is incredibly valuable, incredibly beautiful, not because of other people thinking you're smart or you getting a grade or any of those things, but the stuff that is deeper than that, which is like believing that you matter and believing that your work matters and your thoughts matter and the world, would really benefit from you being part of it. That's what I think education is about. It's not about grades, performance, transcripts, any of that. It's about believing in yourself. So I hope that, you can all feel that.
I love that entire response, including the beginning, despite being a professor. Yeah, it would be awesome if we were all 100% motivated all the time. But again, not reality. And I do hope that at least the students in this class feel that I have espoused that throughout the quarter and been, lenient when it's not working out for you. So we are at time. I want to thank Dr. Hicks for everything that you said today, came to chat with us, spent your time. I know time is limited. So thank you for that. I have saved all the questions from the chat, and there's a few we didn't get to, so I will pass those along, and I'll share those responses with everybody. Yeah, and in the chat, I am not motivated all the time either. So if I have led you to believe that I am sorry, because it is simply not true. We're going to chat a little bit more about my path next week. So thank you again to Dr. Hicks for your time, for coming today. I really, really enjoyed this. I'm sure all the students did too. I will hang out for any questions at the end. And Kat, if you are free for another minute or two, if students have specific questions, I would love that. But if not, have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Thanks for your engagement here. And I will see everybody on Monday.
I'm free all day, actually. So I could talk about how we get through this year, whatever.
Perfect. Yeah. So if anybody has any questions or comments or thoughts, feel free to unmute yourself here or throw it in the chat. I am amongst all the thank yous and the wonderful answers here. And thanks for the life advice. And thanks for saying those things in case, Kat, you didn't see them. There's a whole barrage of those in there. So yeah, I'll pause from talking if anybody wants to unmute themselves. I see, Jeff, that you are unmuted. So go ahead.
Yes, this is a very, very specific question. What are some good keywords when looking for jobs on sites like Indeed or LinkedIn or other similar ones? What are some good keywords to find the kind of job that you have?
The kind of job that I have, how flattering. At what level? Like at sort of junior researcher, senior researcher, like
at the level that you can reasonably get. So I'm personally trying to wait a couple of years until I jump into my PhD, and I'd like to get a position doing the kind of like what you're doing is basically kind of what I want to do in terms of research.
Yeah.
But how do I do that with an undergrad degree?
First of all, you can. So don't believe all of the chatter, especially I saw somebody said something about a job fair thing and someone was like, oh, we're only here to recruit PhDs. I'm sorry that happens. That is so obnoxious to me. And you're all experiencing a selection scenario where you're at UCSD. So the kinds of things you're encountering are probably geared around that R1 university situation. It used to be that research had fewer roles in tech. And there's a couple things I want to say. First, it doesn't have to be in tech. And there are jobs that do what I do and work on problems like this. My brother is a researcher an analyst, actually, like an analyst researcher in a hospital, made the choice not to go to grad school. COVID happened this year. He helped to set up the COVID ward and make sure that it was working in his hospital. He directly saves people's lives with his work and has no interest in a PhD, at all. So, and contributes to a lot of these questions about how are people going to behave in the real world. Keywords, I would look for, like there are some topic keywords. So predictive analytics is still a big one. Causal inference is increasingly a big one. People are starting to say things like behavioral science. I have sometimes messaged when I see one of these jobs that's at a certain level, I have messaged and said, are you sure? Because what if you want someone at a different level? I have also hired someone who messaged me and said, are you sure? Because I'm a pretty badass, contributor anyway. And I think that this is part of the part where hiring is just terrible and people are terrible at it. And I'm sorry for that. But, if you can develop a little bit of like the ability to present your story and negotiate with people, that'll go far. Other keywords, there's a lot of keywords in data science that I'll give you anti-keywords. I rule out, stuff that has to do with databases. I rule out, jobs that are just, I can actually do a lot of data engineering work, but I don't want to. It is a perfectly valid choice that other people might want to do, but it is usually not the kind of job that I do, which is more like open-ended research questions. But there's a lot of jobs and very good jobs, which I think are super fine to go after and very stable sometimes, that are kind of like, we need people to build better pipelines for like getting our data to the people who don't quite know how to work with data, like those kinds of jobs. So I rule out, descriptions like that. Yeah, hopefully that was enough.
Yeah, Conrad, I saw that you are unmuted and you were the one who mentioned that you had that unfortunate interaction at the job fair, and it happens and it's stupid. But yeah, sorry. So did you have a question?
Yeah, it was actually a question posed by somebody else, but it actually kind of ties into that. It was a lot of the things that I'm seeing, a lot of the things that, at least in data science, that I'm seeing offered are basically gearing towards graduate students. And I don't mind the thought of grad school, but that's absolutely not something that I want. The whole reason why I chose UCSD was because I thought this would be a good enough university that I would get the job skills, I would get the reputation of UCSD and be able to get into the job market without having to claw my way into it. And to be honest, up to this point, I feel like I have some really cool skills, but I have no idea how you would market them because I love people. So everything I do here is I'm learning more and more tech stuff, but I don't know how to market the fact that I can do some of it, but I am not desiring that at all. Or that's not the end goal. My end goal is to work with the people.
Yeah. Okay. I definitely think if you are kind of thinking, okay, I could go to grad school. I guess I could muscle my way through grad school or grit my teeth through it, to get the credential or something like that. There are so many paths in the world that are not grad school. I did a PhD because I loved school. I was just like first of all, I spent most of my life not in school. So that maybe that helped. So I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I did not have a career plan. The fact that I did a PhD should not become this thing that feels like a precondition for having my kind of job. Mm-hmm. I really don't think so. I do think in some particular situations, it is still like it sets the course for a certain kind of path. So for instance, my boss, who's the VP of our data and has to work with big education partners, it's really expected that she would have a PhD. And it's pretty specific PhD. It's like she did educational policy work, mm-hmm. And I don't want that job, actually. So it's a great job and someone needs to do it. There are paths like that. There's a certain level if you want to work for I'm just sticking to my field, which is education. If you wanted to work, but there's like analogs for other areas. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to work for like the Department of Education, it's probably still the case that you would stop at a certain level of getting promoted, unless you had a grad degree. Okay. It's not always the case though, too, because particularly I think if you're someone, I have always been kind of a weirdo, in my career, kind of like fitting multiple buckets, carve my own path. Like people sometimes look at my resume and don't know what to do with it. Like, okay, startup, but also big tech, but also you like to work with like social, organizations like adult education in San Diego, East County, those could fit under multiple things. And I didn't need a PhD for a lot of that. So what's the point of this is like, I think that there's still that gateway a bit in parts of tech, especially if it's like, there's a Facebook data science team. They can go recruit whoever they want. They have a certain stereotype, which I think is silly, but like, they're like, we're just going to grab a bunch of PhDs. I think it's limited. I also think it's changing. It's already changed a lot in just 5 years or so. But, there's always going to be that kind of like elitism in the world, I think, which I don't appreciate. But I still think that even when that exists, there are paths around it. My team would hire someone without a PhD for sure. It would not hire someone at a senior researcher level, which like hardly matters, to me. You could also work in an organization, like if you came in and then get promoted to my level. So I kind of think of it like I swap years of experience for PhD or another kind of degree when I evaluate people. I think that it's very much equivalent. So hopefully that helps. I don't know.
May I ask a follow-up off of that? So one stereotype we've kind of talked about is the PhD or the graduate school, but there's also something else that you actually have also checked in the box that I've heard more with engineering, but it also seems like is kind of doing your time at a startup. Is because that feels like it's an obligatory thing in order to get your foot in the door job-wise. And it usually, from every person that I've ever heard at most startups, other than, of course, if you found one, they tend to be I can't think of any good way to say it, but they treat you very poorly and they kind of work you to the bone with very little recognition or
compensation.
Thank you. That was the word. Or compensation.
Yeah.
And it
they
feels
can be
like
quite
it's almost
toxic. Yeah.
Yeah, but it also feels like any secondary job looks better on you for having that versus not having that. At an unsaid expectation possibly in this field in general?
If it does in this field mean data science or
I see data science probably a little bit different. A lot of these people are looking at it and they're going straight into the stats, but I see data science being a much more people driven thing, and like how to be able to communicate that, how to make a platform for it that people that I see it a little bit different. I see it also in the web development side of ours because we have human computer interaction included with COGS. So for me, I'm not a hardcore data science, but this is definitely a great and required class. So I'm trying to balance this stuff between being a full stack developer, but also being a data scientist.
Got it. Okay. Got it. Yeah. Okay. No, I don't think working at a startup is cost of admission. I really don't. I think that that's part of the like hustle culture story, the like Silicon Valley, like, you know, honestly, like it's kind of BS. I'm sorry. Like maybe it's true for some people and some teams, but in my experience, that is a very small fraction of what's out there. It's a small fraction of what's out there now. It might be cost of entry for certain teams that I can think of. But those teams have weird ideas about what they want, and I don't want to be on them. I started a startup, and as I mentioned, it was majority minority run. So we were quite aware of how toxic the industry can be. You know, we faced it, and we were quite determined, to not be that, and to instead find a community. So, of people who were like-minded, and that did exist. Like we had VCs who were wonderful and who understood kind of the sexism and the other biases and the racism and those kinds of like things that we're grappling with in the world and in the industry. So I guess I don't want to come down too harsh. Like I think there actually are startups out there that are quite interesting and like it can teach you a lot. But it does not have to be. I don't think that anyone should ever say to themselves, I'm going to choose a toxic situation in order to achieve some career goal. It is not worth it. It's never worth it. There's always another way. Like it takes more out of you than you can get from it. And if people say that, then my answer is just like, no. I think that, I guess I just want to say, I think the behavior side and the like people who want to understand people and human behavior, and are not like the most hardcore data science side, a lot of the people who have the loudest voices and microphones and like Twitter platforms in data science are like, oh, I'm this incredibly analytical data scientist, blah, blah, blah. That is not the majority of the jobs. It really isn't. So I actually think that what I do and the intersections of what I do are becoming more and more necessary, more and more needed, particularly if you get a little bit outside of like a very small number of high tech companies. I mean, and if you're willing to think about other organizations, and I found that work sometimes really rewarding. Like, here's an organization maybe people haven't heard of, but it's like doing this cool work in schools, and they certainly don't care if you're like some kind of PhD stereotype or something. I'll stop there, but yeah,
thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
I'm going to add a slight comment that next Friday, we're going to be talking about getting a job. And Conrad, if I don't talk about questions to ask to start to detect if it's a toxic environment, remind me. It should be in there, but just like during the interview process more. And we're going to talk about questions you can ask if it's a role you want, because sometimes you want a specific answer, right? Like you want to know that it's database heavy and you want to be an ML engineer. And sometimes you want to ask those questions to make sure it's not that role, because there's different fits, as Kat was alluding to.
Yeah. And there might be different moments in your career. Like So.
Fun fact, I also have a friend that is a software developer at a startup right now. Her name is Kat, and she also does look very similar to you. So I find this very comical because I'm asking you questions that I've been telling her because she has a horrible startup that she works at. She has a great manager, but yeah, sorry. If I could steal you and have you tell her that would be.
This will be made public.
Feel free to connect us. Yeah.
I was going to say, this video will be made public. So if you want to share this later, I'm going to share the link with everybody after I cut out the beginning part of this where Kat and I were just chatting.
Yeah. Awesome.
Perfect. Okay. We've taken up a lot of Kat's time. Does anybody have remaining pressing questions? There will be an opportunity to send more questions if you have them. Thanks everybody for hanging out a little bit longer. And thank you. Final thank you, Kat. This was amazing. I really, really appreciate it. I know students are going to get a ton out of this. So there were a round of applause in the chat and in the reactions, but I'm going to give you one here on the video as well. So thank you. There's more coming in. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend, and I'll see everybody on Monday.
Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure.